All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's discussion on decoding the clinical spectrum of semisynthetic cannabinoid toxicity. For those of you new to our program, next slide, Jehan. For those of you new to our program, I'm the CEO of Physicians Research Center Plus. It has 3 areas of expertise: SALIS, which is our phase 2 through 4 clinical trial pillar; Buds Info, our analytics pillar; and Cerium, our education pillar, which is really designed for the busy healthcare provider who wants to understand cannabis and its derivatives through the lens of science. So next slide. Okay, so I know some of you have filled this out and it's up here every month, but those of you that have not, I would greatly appreciate if you took the time to scan this QR code and participate in our survey. It's really designed to understand the healthcare provider that we serve and try to improve our programs. You can check out our website if you want to learn more. It's prc-trials-plus.com. All right, so next slide. Oh, no, leave this up. Oops, no, leave it up because some of them may be getting a cup of coffee or tea or water or something. So I just wanted to kick off this evening to remind everyone that I'm a public health pharmacoepidemiologist, and this topic is of great interest to me. I've been monitoring what I call the alphabet soup of these semisynthetic synthetic cannabinoids since the first hospitalizations due to Delta 8 a couple of years ago. And my team, I guess, the team published the cases that were reported in the FDA Affairs database on Delta 8 adverse events that were reported. So if you ever have the time to check that out, it's a pretty good summary of what was going on. So now joining me this evening, you want to go to the next slide, Jehan, is Dr. Phil Malloy, rheumatologist, recently retired from clinical practice in the Massachusetts area. And he remains very active in caring for patients and, participating in the PRC environment, in a number of ways. Dr. Marcoux is a cannabinoid researcher who's worked in the cannabis area for greater than 20 years. And he too supports the PRC program, the clinical trial, the analytics, and leads the journal club. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil and Jehan.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cerium Journal Club. Our mission is to support the education of healthcare professionals, as well with discussions of published research, and we do our best to approach each paper with consistency, fairness, and transparency. The title of today's journal club is Decoding Semisynthetic Cannabinoid Toxicity. What is a semisynthetic cannabinoid? Well, we'll try to talk about that. It was the term that we thought would be best to describe these artificially derived cannabinoids. We'll be discussing 3 case reports from 3 different journals across the world, and we'll just be walking you through those. But first, we want to talk a little bit about what it is we're talking about. And we just wanted to put a disclaimer that, again, reminding people that the purpose of this journal club is to educate and raise awareness. We are not recommending any policy or regulatory decisions.
Right, it's really scientific exchange is what we're really trying to do.
Correct. So some of the public health issues related to HHCs is you have rogue chemists, you have products being labeled as being legal or illegal or whatnot. You have terminology issues. Essentially what you have are designer drugs or novel cannabinoids being labeled as hemp or CBD. And you're taking compounds and making small changes in them, but as we know in both scientific and legal literature, small differences could greatly affect the functionality of compounds. And this is, again, not only in case law, but also in the scientific literature, which is a fascinating area. So you may have encountered these and not know it. They sometimes are waved about like crystalline powers, like some sort of illicit relic seen here on the left with someone on LinkedIn saying, hey, if you want some of this, come meet me at, BizCon. Happy Thanksgiving. This stuff is mass produced, and what do you know, someone is waving it around in a little vial at a conference. So these things are being widely disseminated, widely produced. How are they made, you say? Good question. The same way that everything that's hydrogenated is made, through catalytic hydrogenation. So you take THC compounds and you hydrogenate them. Pretty straightforward process. And it's getting even more straightforward because you can take non-cannabinoid components, and with a one pot simple step, you can make your own HHCs. I do not recommend you try this at home. Leave it to the rogue chemists. And so what do these compounds do? Well, the chemistry around these has been around for decades. Decades. People are like, oh, an Israeli scientist discovered how to make this stuff. Well, that's great, but where's the information about what it does in humans, about its safety issues, and things like that? So the part of the problem is we have these novel cannabinoids flooding the world market. There are biotechnological modifications surging, not just chemistry in the lab, but we have to start thinking about people using bacteria and yeast and other forms of modification. And so one of the issues is just the nomenclature. And so on the bottom left, there's evolving nomenclature. So you could have paleo EU biosynthetic compounds, you can have neo dis biosynthetic, you could have paleo post synthetic, you could have paleo neo EU dis biosynthetic compounds, just to try to figure out where are these coming from. Are they from a genetically modified organism? Did they never occur in nature before? Are they a modification of a ancient compound like a THC derivative, which is what we're talking about? Now, if your heads are done exploding from that, the basic take-home message is that we have this class of compounds called hexahydrocannabinols, HHC for short. Many of these are THC isomers, THC derivatives. They have unpredictable effects. There is one study done in rhesus monkeys 1,000,000 years ago that shows that they are slightly less potent than THC, delta 9 THC, but we don't really know because, again, it's never been reproduced or studied under a modern scientific methods. These are readily available online in retail stores, marketed as a legal alternative to cannabis. They vary in potency, and the presence of impurities is quite significant. So
Is it safe to say, Jehan, that these compounds were not appreciated or known when the Farm Bill was proposed and worked its way through?
yes, unfortunately, everyone who worked on the Farm Bill knew nothing about what could be made from CBD. So there is a profound amount of cannabinoids that can be derived from CBD and synthesized. So when they wrote this, nobody in the room really knew much about it. So yeah, so I don't think they quite envisioned that people would just be making kind of whatever they wanted under the guise of the Farm Bill.
Is it also safe to assume that most of these new synthetic products are likely to show up in a urine test, which are THC-based directed urine tests? Is that how true would that statement be in your opinion?
So it's an interesting question because there are some urine tests for these. There are some antibody tests for these, but it is unclear because there are so many how reliable it is. Could you fail a general THC drug test? Probably, because again, if the chemist is looking for something that is broadly defined as THC, or you could say, we're not sure what resolution or how their instrument is set up, but you could be running a fairly, let's say, rugged or test, and it just shows up as THC in your chromatogram in your analysis because you're looking for THC-like compounds. So depending on how the drug test is set up, it could lead to a failure. Also, there could be no shortage of THC, delta 9 THC contamination in these products, because the synthesis of these products is not clean. It's not a one-to-one. Oh, I put in these two things and I only make this one thing. You're making a whole class of compounds, and your majority might be your target, but you'll have lots of other stuff. Similarly, when people are deriving THC compounds from CBD, they will derive a lot of delta 9, for example. So you could fail a drug test, and it might be for the novel drugs, or it might be from delta 9 contamination from the process of synthesizing the compounds. But there are drug tests. If you go into Google Scholar or PubMed, you can find a urinalysis for synthetic cannabinoids or artificially derived cannabinoids or neo biosynthetic or whatever terminology you want to use. I think neocannabinoids, we'll call them that.
Thanks.
All right, so we're talking about case reports tonight. We're not talking about clinical research or animal studies. So, Dr. Malloy, Phil, normally we talk about a study design here, but this is a case report or a series of case reports. What is a case report?
Well, case reports are like sentinel events in a hospital. And even though the conclusions you draw are more general, and it's usually the conclusion from a case report is, oh, I didn't know this could happen. Maybe this deserves further looking at. And I think that's the value of the three case reports we're going to look at tonight. Who knew this was out there, sort of thing? And then we can start doing more formal epidemiology when we have the tools, like better urine tests.
Excellent. And these can also be great tools for detecting novel therapeutic effects too. The one I like to remind people of is CBD for pediatric epilepsy. That was a case report that led to the creation of Epidiolex. So these case reports can, just as Phil said, can be, I think it's a great example, sentinels for things, but they can also help us find new therapies. So we're going to start off with our first case report, which is actually two cases of an issue developed from vaping HHC products by O. Mahoney, published in 2024. Involved some delusions, some auditory hallucinations, severe agitation. They do talk about the treatments with antipsychotics, full recovery with abstinence and follow-up care. So a little bit of a spoiler alert here, but let's walk through the first one. So case 1A, by this article by Mahoney, we have a 20-year-old male, regular cannabis user for 3 years, presented with delusions of guilt and persecution, auditory hallucination, and thought disorganization. Was experiencing dissociative symptoms and insomnia for 3 days. What the product that he was using was a daily vape product containing 95% HHC distillate with 5% of terpenes that were added to it, and voluntarily admitted himself to a psychiatric unit. Treated himself, or the clinicians prescribed olanzapine and clonazepam, and he had a full recovery after 2 weeks of treatment and even at 5 months of follow-up. And similarly, in case 1B, a man in his late 30s who had a prior episode of cannabis-induced psychosis about a little over 2 years before, presented with bizarre speech, thought disorder, agitation, was actually, interesting enough, using the same vape, or at least the same packaging as in case 1 for 2 weeks before having this episode. Again, voluntary admission to a psychiatric unit, treated with aripiprazole, 10 milligrams daily. Again, recovered within 10 days and resumed work after a phased return. So these, to me, are kind of striking cases where people who have experience with cannabis, have experienced it with the effects of cannabis, experience something that they didn't predict, I think, with these compounds. Again, Dr. Malloy, is there anything you want to add to these two? We have so much
Um,
to discuss.
yeah, this often when you read a case report, you wish you knew more about the patient. You wish you knew more about if they had any past mental health history, family history, and you also wish you knew more about the product. One of the problems with the case report is that um, we don't have the product in our hand to send to a lab to know exactly what was in it. We just know what was on the package or what the patient reported. They probably bought it in some, well, who knows where they bought it or given by a friend or whatever. So we don't have the product and we don't know a lot about the patient's comorbidities history.
We, that's a great point. We know that it's labeled as being an HHC vape, but, and it's labeled as being 95% HHC, but we don't know for sure, because again, we don't have any analysis on the patient or on the product that was in question.
It would be nice to know where he bought the thing. With these two patients bought the same product
Right, it's a,
online, some gas station at a rest stop on a highway, who knows?
so here's the second one. So, you know, Phil, we talked about this one a little bit, and do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. Sure. This is a 32-year-old female, Caucasian female, with a history of PTSD and no substance use disorder. So she took a product that she stated was labeled as having 25 milligrams of delta 10 THC for musculoskeletal pain. She took three of those. 72 hours later, she became symptomatic with speech and appetite issues, flattened affect, paranoia, and catatonia, which is pretty striking. Um, when she was presented for healthcare, she was marked in a catatonic state, unresponsive to pain, unresponsive to verbal commands, thrashing, and was unable to interact with anyone. She was thought to have a possible seizure disorder, um, and you can read the rest. Further examination, post-ictal cerebral swelling. So she had an MRI. That you would think that she had an MRI, except for the next line says an MRI was attempted but not completed. This woman tested positive for THC in her urine. So there's more slides to this case, right, Jehan?
Yeah, so they go into a little more detail about their initial approach.
And this is, yeah, the treatment. Um, Mark, you know more about this than I do. I don't know if lorazepam or related medicines are traditional ways to treat catatonia, but that's how this woman was treated. She had a response, and the working diagnosis was catatonia caused by the substance she reported to take. That was lorazepam responsive.
Yeah,
As you can see, the
this
dose.
Go ahead.
seems pretty normal. It's so far all of the treatments seem pretty normal, but it looks
Okay,
complicated, pretty standard in psychiatry.
okay.
And, and
But
uh,
what I find that is interesting with the psychosis or the catatonia we can discuss later, because I do have a couple questions. But okay, go ahead.
y- well, thank you so much, Mark. And because there are one or two things that struck me as concerning, but I'm glad they were able to start the IV nutrition because of the continued refusal to eat or drink. And also, they were considering electroconvulsive therapy, but unavailable at the treating facility. Again, but on day 30, the patient was transferred to another facility. And I just want to go back and say a product labeled as 25 milligrams delta 10 THC, but again, we can't be sure without the product being analyzed. So that was a case by Puri et al. Um, this is case 3, which was reported to be a 19-year-old previously healthy male. We actually have a picture of the product there. I believe it's 5 grams of Girl Scout cookies HHCP. So I assume that is a THC derivative that is hydrogenated. Basically consumed this product mixed into a Thai food dish and also smoked it. So they were cooking and smoking, um, and making otherwise probably thinking they're being responsible. I'm going to make an edible at home. I'm going to smoke some of it, and basically ingested a fair amount, 450 milligrams of this compound. And this product also contained trace amounts of THC, HHC, and HHCO, which is another, I believe, an acetate derivative. So again, mixture of compounds that they were able to identify. Doesn't mean those are the only compounds in it. Basically, 2 hours after ingestion, the patient became extremely drowsy, but displayed fluctuating consciousness. The next morning was confusion, panic, agitation, and what is really concerning is respiratory distress. Was taken to a psychiatric emergency department, was transferred to a somatic care unit due to severe sedation and cardiovascular instability. So again, just a little bit more, Phil, if you want to go talk maybe a little bit about these
Sure.
symptoms, because again, they did do some of the toxicology you like to see.
Yes. Before we go on, is 450 milligrams a big number? And sometimes when you read about these synthetics and partially synthetic products, you read a comment, this is more potent than Delta 9 or less potent than Delta 9. Are those accurate? And where did those numbers come from? As a scientist, uh, what can you say about that?
So I think when they come up with those numbers, they might be looking at, you know, what the product is labeled as. So if they smoked 1 gram of this and it has 10%, well, that's 100 milligrams, just to use simple numbers, right? That they inhaled, but maybe they're not accounting for how much was burned in the process, how much was destroyed from heat, altered from heat, how much was exhaled, and things like that. So, those are estimates that researchers put out there. And so maybe it's more of like an exposure to 400 milligrams. How much was actually absorbed? How much reached the target site? Let's just say the receptors is another question as well. But in terms of talking about exposure, you can do a calculation. I have this much percent. I put this many grams of 9% HHCP in my food, and I prepared something to smoke that had this many grams or milligrams. You can look at the percentage and derive it that way. You could also potentially look at something like blood levels and then figure out, well, how much blood does the average person his size have, and figure out what the exposure level is there. So I'd have to double check how they derive that amount. I'm not sure if they specified. Case
All
reports
right.
sometimes don't have all the calculations in them.
If it's in the ballpark of Delta 9, 450 sounds like a big number to me. That's all.
Yeah, even if we want to say it's half as potent,
Yeah.
it still
Yeah.
sounds like a lot. I would agree.
So
Yeah.
on the symptoms here, under cardiovascular, unstable heart rate, persistent hypotension despite fluids, the patient sounds like they were very sick. I can visualize this patient being in an ICU, although that wasn't spelled out. Neurologic fluctuating level of consciousness, amnesia, fever, and the toxicology is interesting. So I'm presuming they did chromatography and mass spec to come up with these numbers. Um, but you can see what was detected in the blood and the product. Um,
And one thing I'd add
HHC,
about the blood analysis is that, for these using GC or LC or mass spec, as you mentioned, you have to kind of have an idea. I would say this, you need to know what you're looking for, because many compounds, when put in a vacuum and zapped with light, can look similar. They can have overlapping fingerprints. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for. So having a labeled product, having the patient being able to say what they ingested or what they think they ingested gives you a place to look for it. It makes some of the difficulty here, but they had, I think, a leg up because they knew what they could ask the lab to look for a certain compound and they could target their analysis. But it's very difficult to just do a screen for, I don't know, find something. It's, it's
Yeah.
very difficult.
So the small print says that these are low numbers, the absolute concentrations, and it was probably, I don't think we know what the half-life, biologic half-life of these are, but the blood was sampled 68 hours post-ingestion, and that's why these numbers are small and look small. And the product analysis, um, you can see which and HHCO um, metabolizes the HHC in the body. So it's nice to have more data here. In the acute care, you can see 3 liters of fluid to address hypertension, somatic care unit, regain consciousness 50 hours post-ingestion, no lasting complications, discharged 2.5 days later.
With apparently not remembering any of the event either, which is maybe surprising, maybe not surprising. But I think it's kind
If
of fascinating in some ways.
if these products are widely available, how come we don't see more case reports or hear about it more? I mean, I didn't hear about this till 2024 last year.
I think some people, it's almost like it reminds me of the elevated plus maze in animals. You give an animal a really potent cannabinoid, it doesn't stay in the open part of the maze. It'll go to a covered part of the maze and just stay there till it feels better. And so I'd be willing to bet that there are some people who will just tough it out, who won't report it, or will say that they didn't use it, or they'll wake up in an even more compromised position and not want to talk about it because of where they ended up. Um, so I think sometimes these are also taken with other substances, like maybe they were drinking or having other medications or other recreational substances and don't want to say what it is. You could also just show up to the ER, refuse, or maybe they don't have the toxicology tests available and you're just being treated like you're having an episode on something else. Or you could just say it's cannabis, and if they're not looking for these things, they probably won't find them. They won't spend the money and time on those analyses. But there could be a number of reasons. I mean, why are only, why are there only a few hundred Delta 8 cases reported when they're by the FDA when there were thousands happening? And I think it has to do with issue with also how the data is gathered, how it's shared, how it's categorized. There could be a number of issues. What happens when someone calls poison control and the person says, we don't have a form for collecting information about this novel substance?
Yeah.
So this is just a little chart we tried to put together, to talk about comparing the summaries of these different reports. And you have, looking at age groups, we're seeing a lot of young adults, teenagers were the case, one middle-aged adult, but young adults, teenagers were the majority in these case reports. Vaping, smoking, eating, we see psychosis, catatonia, severe sedation, but the general treatment seems to be a combination of antipsychotics and supportive care, with even ECT proposed as well. In 2 out of 3 full recovery at the time of publishing. One patient only had a partial recovery. And so some of the challenges with this is that these products are available online and in stores. Sometimes their marketing is somewhat misleading. And there's difficulty in detecting these substance and toxicology screens. And it's not that there aren't tools available, it's that the tools either aren't commercialized, aren't readily available, and you have to know what you're looking for. If there are hundreds of different THC isomers, that could take a really long time to screen and identify. But if you know what you're looking for, it can happen much faster. So, Dr. Malloy,
Yeah.
I mean, how can healthcare providers have a conversation with their patients about this? Or, how could you better identify and treat cases of involving synthetic cannabinoids? I know we put the 3 most difficult questions about this subject in the world on this slide.
Well, you know, first of all, I don't think most healthcare providers, when they're interacting with a patient that's healthy and asymptomatic, go digging. It's only when there's an issue, like abnormal behavior, change in behavior, or cognition or performance or something like that. So I can tell you, as 4 decades in practice, I could be criticized for not proactively asking my patients about substance use more often, both traditional and uh, um, all this emerging stuff. So I don't think doctors bring it up unless there's a reason to bring it up. It's like a cop doesn't pull you over if you're driving perfectly, but if you start swerving, you might get pulled over, and that's how we we react in the exam room, I think. Maybe it's a little bit different for pediatrics. A parent could say, I found this in my kid's bedroom. My kid's friend just got arrested for this, or there's so many different variations on what could be a trigger to dig into it. And then taking a history, I don't know how many patients, I don't know if there's data on how many patients are frank and honest with their doctors. I know that until I retired last year, I would reassure my patients that I wasn't going to write anything in their records without their permission about this.
Yeah.
Because I did that for better or for worse. It's not fair, on the one hand, to keep an important thing out of the record, but it's not fair to say I'll write it in if that prohibits the patient from being honest.
Thank you. And we
Yeah,
can
so
start
I
to,
think that there's some comments coming up, Jehan. I mean, I know you didn't get through everything, Phil. And I just want to leave time at the end, Jehan, for me to make a comment about
we
this.
will, we
And I
will
think that you
absolutely leave
have the
time.
other QR code, right, in
But
slides.
yes,
Yeah,
we have
perfect.
2
So let's
more.
open it up for, I think that there's a lot of discussion. Mark said he had a few comments. I know we didn't get through all of this, but the ethical considerations, that's a hot potato one right there. I mean,
Yeah, you can answer it if you want. I mean, all right, Mark, you got your hand up. Please go ahead. And I'm happy to go back to any other slides that you would like to look at as well. But yeah, let's get you unmuted.
Unmute. No, wait a minute. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yes.
Okay. Well, I think you brought these articles are great, and I saw one where the guy sawed his leg off, and then they just blamed it on cannabis instead of it was really a synthetic cannabis. So they DEA, they have all the nasty synthetic cannabinoids, but it gets confusing now with the looping closed with basically Delta 9 THC from CBD. So I think one way to get over this is I've designed like a little classification scheme for synthetics. You have your it's real easy. Your first generation ones are your really nasty ones like Spice, K2, the JWs, the CP88, all those original ones. And now you have something like you have to get sophisticated in your classification scheme. So those were first generation synthetics. Now we have the second generation hemp derived synthetics, and you can divide them into your CBD, hemp-derived THC synthetics, hemp-derived CBG, hemp-derived, and then you can classify these new generation synthetics, which they really are synthetics and should stay a Schedule 1. And so anyway, we got to educate our clinicians better by making a classification scheme that really is an umbrella for all of these varieties. So HHC is a second generation hemp-derived synthetic THC-like compound. So it's basically hydrogenated THC. And then finally, I would say we need to know what cultivar the source is. If it's a cultivar 3 that's CBD and it's 30% THC, there's a problem with that, you know? It doesn't match. And finally, these doctors that push the monodominant capsules, you know, I'm not even sure when you buy a THCV capsule, that's from CBD. That's not from a cultivar type 1, that's fake basically. So we really need to get a grasp on it. I would not call it semi-synthetic. That's too confusing. So in fact, I'm tempted as a psychiatrist, and I'll close, to diagnose them as an other substance-induced psychotic disorder. It's not even a cannabinoid. You follow what I'm saying? It's not even cannabis, like cannabis-induced psychotic disorder. You know, doing too much regular cannabis and you get psychotic disorder. But this is an other or unknown or other substance-induced psychotic disorder. I bet nobody diagnoses it like that. So anyway, it is very complicated. Sorry for taking up.
No,
so
you
much
bring up
time.
a great point, Dr. Viner. I appreciate that because when I wrote the term semi-synthetic, I kind of just put it out there because I knew it would create the confusion I wanted. And I even got pushback from standards groups saying, nobody knows what you'll be talking about. And I said, we don't know what we're talking about. Because there are so many compounds that could be in these things. And I really like something you brought up. And I think it's also a barrier to research is if you and I wanted to do a study on THCV and we took a plant compound and created something that doesn't naturally occur in cannabis, like a 30% THCV variety or product, we would have to file a new drug application or investigative new drug application with the FDA. We wouldn't just be able to make it and sell it if we actually wanted to do a controlled study. And I think that is such a great point, saying that some of these products are artificially created. They are, and we don't understand their origin. Where are they coming from? And there are classification systems that are being proposed to help elucidate, are these like more paleo, which is a term used more like ancient, naturally occurring, you know, from the plant, or are they more neo, novel, new creations? Are they derived from an older compound? Or are they completely novel and new? And this issue also gets diluted because you'll have the pontificators of highly questionable material will come out and say, oh, well, these naturally occur in nature. And you'll be like, well, they occur as artifacts or by accident or in such an infinitesimally small amount that only trace amounts have ever been found in any cannabis product in the history of humanity. And therefore, it's good to consume it in large amounts. So there's a bit of confusion over there when people say, oh, this is a natural compound. Well, it might occur in a very, very low probability as an artifact, but you know, it does not occur in the amounts that people are consuming today naturally. Those are only achievable through direct manipulation of the plant. So I think those are great great comments. Again, happy to open it up. I give you, if you want to, Mark, if you want to defend yourself against anything I said. But I'm happy to open up to any other comments that folks have. You can use the hand raise function to keep some order, or if you, I understand if you're on a phone or a tablet,
Yeah,
it's
well,
easy.
while we're waiting for someone else to jump in, I'll just, so Mark and the other physicians on the call. I think I did a quick look at fairs after I saw this, and what's interesting is I think that our government, our regulatory agencies still are struggling in how to classify these things in their own system. Because they have, when you look up, they do have the HHC product. There's 5 cases with that listed as a potential suspect product. But they have there's something catch-all of synthetic. So to your point, Jahan, they may not always know what it is, but maybe like someone says, oh, it's something, but they don't have the ability. The reporter doesn't have the ability to actually know exactly what that synthetic cannabinoid was. There's actually 23 cases in fairs, and 22 are deaths, which is pretty alarming, right? When you just think about that, because if you remember when I did the Delta 8 paper, there were only 200 and some cases, and the most common adverse event was dyspnea, right? Shortness of breath. And then after I reported that paper, they changed all the categorizations within the FAERS database, and it's difficult to reproduce. And then they put out their own paper, the FDA put out their own paper like a year or so later on the same thing. But, now they put out, I think the FDA has asked for medical, the medical community to report these cannabinoids, even though it's not cannabis, it might be hemp derived, into their FAERS database. Um, Part of it, I know you sent that to me like maybe a month ago, Jahan, but I have the QR code that I've been out there like, pounding the pavement for people to use, doing the guerrilla marketing. I don't know if you have that up there. So while we're still talking, we can just, this is something that I have printed out in some of my doctor's offices for patients to just scan. And it can be for, hemp, any kind of product, and it's patient reported, it's anonymous, just trying to collect this kind of data, which is very, very important, because I think to your point, to Mark and Phil and Jahan, there's many more of these that just go unreported.
Absolutely.
All right, so anyone else? I mean, I didn't know.
Yes, we actually have AJ Nyack. Dr. Nyack is here. He had his hand raised. Please
Okay, great.
unmute yourself. He's a expert on, allergic responses to cannabis, a professor. It's great to see you again, AJ. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, John. First of all, I'm sorry. 8 o'clock is a little bit late for me. I, I halfway through, I realized I was just having private conversation with another member on this, not realizing I wasn't actually sending it to the whole group. Um, but what to me, having been in the field of cannabis, and I've learned quite a bit from these seminars, so I'm always looking forward to them. Um, the one thing that kind of is frustrating to me is that when we found that individuals were allergic to cannabis, and doctors cannot do skin prick testing for allergy in the clinic, we basically came up with a solution where we wanted to see if hemp extract, like protein extract, I'm not even talking about, the cannabinoids in it. I'm just talking about plain protein extracts, trying to see if hemp is a good, suitable um, surrogate for cannabis testing, and we showed that it has all the proteins that are relevant, right, for cannabis allergy. Now, the process of trying to get that extract available for physicians for testing is $1 million worth of effort, and yet here we have compounds that are either sourced from hemp and then modified, and are available in the market so easily, and somehow the government doesn't have the ability to have any oversight on this. So to me, I'm not quite sure that that the government really knows what they're doing about this. But if something is out there with enough evidence that it's a problem. It's a product. I don't know if it is HHC or not yet because the labeling on these things, God only knows what's in it. But why is it hard for the government to have some kind of a control over what actually eventually gets out in the market, especially if it is derived from hemp? It has to have meet some standard.
So that's a great question, and things are a changing. The times are a changing, and I'm happy to have someone else chime in as well. One of the things that is changing, and then I will let someone else speak, is that in end of 2025, the federal government DEA will actually require the hemp testing labs to be DEA registered. So if you want to test hemp products and put labels on them, because again, it's a bit of a misconception. There is no compliance tested regarding final products for these things, but they are getting tested. These are people that have some sort of science-ish background. They do get it tested to see, okay, did I actually make the compound I'm trying to make? They do get it tested. They don't want to, that they're using some form of weights and measures, so that involves knowing what's in it. But again, how accurate is that testing? How reliable is it? Is it publicly available? There's a whole bunch of questions there, but their sources for lab testing will be changing. So I think there's changing. But Persephone, goddess of the underworld, is here and had a comment in the chat about being able to it's fraudulent. Yes, the testing is fraudulent.
Yeah, and has posted a lot of, I guess these are certificate of analysis reports here.
Yeah, so if you have a
Maybe she
minute,
wants to say a comment or something.
yeah, if you have a minute to go into the chat, scroll through, you'll see a lot of things shared by our participant here that are
Can
interesting.
you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, y'all. So it looks Persephone, but it's Persephone. I'm like, they don't teach cursive or Greek mythology anymore, apparently. So, hi, y'all. I actually, a little quick snippet of how I'm involved here. I grew up in cannabis. My mom was, as the industry called, an OG. But in my vanilla life, I was a nurse. So my company, we're working on pharmaceutical development from Alzheimer's treatments to pancreatic cancer treatment to wound care. But we're looking a lot at the toxicology coming out of these, what we call frankennoids. We've been doing shelf pulls in here in Oklahoma from the medical cannabis sector all the way down to the hemp sectors in these smoke shops. And what we're finding is just nasty contaminants, lots of pesticides. We even did one of the blunt wrappers, the owl blunt wrappers a lot of people use. Those were full of lead, arsenic, just nasty stuff. So we've been pushing a lot of this. We've got some other people that have been doing some tox reports. I'm not sure if you guys know of Dr. Michelle Peace. She's, I think she's University of Virginia. I posted in the chat, she had a case, male 20s, ended up smoking some like THC vape, ended up with acute psychosis, thought he was in the video game Grand Theft Auto, went out and shot up a couple cop cars with the officers in them. Luckily, everybody was unharmed in this incident, but he ended up in a psych ward for 18 months, going through trial, everything else. And he was, the charges were dropped due to acute psychosis from this
Wow.
vape. So yeah, and Cassandra Taylor with the FDA she's been working really hard on trying to get some regulation down. I know you got a lot of support from government officials, from all bipartisan support. You got Senator Griffin up in Virginia. He's talking about taking private right of action because the government is not doing anything about these. That's where you see the states coming in one by one and after another trying to ban these. But then they get convinced by these lobbyists paid from these big hemp groups, such as like this 3Chi and MC Nutraceuticals, that are pushing all these crap out there, making millions of dollars. I mean, they estimate the hemp industry to be a $28 billion a year. And a lot of that's coming from these frankennoid sales. But now the regulations are like, oh, let's just tax it and stuff like that. Okay, so you still want to make tax money on poison. So that's why I call them little Purdue Juniors.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
that perspective from Persephone. That is great. appreciate the comments. And again, there's something that Alexander Hamilton said, right? What is it that the law is whatever is successfully argued and plausibly maintained. So we have to think about how can we, maintain whatever regulations we want. We have a comment. I see Jesse has his hand up. Thank you so much for using that feature. We are running into the end of time, so please share.
Yeah, so just to comment a little bit further, I'm sure most of you guys are in legalized states with legalized recreational or medicinal actual marijuana legislation. Here in the Midwest, I'm in Wisconsin. I completely understand where you're coming from with these Frankenoids or what they were called. I see them everywhere. As soon as the hemp farm bill came through, company after company is just mass rolling out all these products, and the COAs are all scrambled, and you can tell that they've been compromised. So coming from the Midwest, where there's not really good recognizable product out here, I get where the fear is. I haven't seen any negative side effects from a lot of these hemp cannabinoids. Not to say that there aren't any, we're just not registering them here. There's nobody really going out and shooting anybody up, but there is concerns from my point of view, being a nurse practitioner and working with some of these clients, what they're using and how much they're using. We have some out here that are being kind of sold at 50,000 milligrams of Delta-9 THC, which is a bit excessive, but they're selling like hotcakes because everybody feels like the more that they get, the better the product is, without it having been thoroughly tested or CGMP compliant, which is where my concern is as well. So safety is always an issue and a factor out here, which is where I try to go out and voice my concerns to all these industries. But like Persephone was saying, 3Chi is out here and they're everywhere. But the testing, it's not needed. Nobody cares about it. Nobody asks about it. And legislators don't know anything about the industry that's going on right now. No matter how much you put it in their face, they don't understand the chemistry of extracting cannabinoids from CBD products or from hemp products. So that's a big concern.
Thank you,
That's my
Jesse.
concern.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I
nail
would-
on the head. And just want to jump in. I grew up in Door County.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, Jesse. And I think that that is a theme we touched upon, and I think you hit it on the head, is some of these products, right, might be labeled as HHC. We don't really know what's in them. They might have gotten a product that was tested and said it's HHC, and it might just be a ton of Farm Bill THC in there. And that is, if you look at old denials of rescheduling petitions from the DEA, and I know we can say what we want about that, but one of the things that's really interesting about reading those, which I'm sure you all have, is that they would always cite that the one of the hallmarks that makes cannabis unsafe for rescheduling or descheduling is that people don't know what they're using one day to the next. So they might use a product that's a little bit, and the next time they use it, they have too much. And that is like the definition of what leads to unwanted effects for a substance, is that you are using less or more than you're intending to use, and you're getting less or more of the effect that you want. So you have this unpredictable interactions, and that is what makes something highly prone to abuse.
Right. There's no consistency in the products.
And so just because, and so it's almost like, how dangerous can we make it? It's,
Right.
if we label it as something else and put a lot of something that people aren't expecting in it, that is what creates this unpredictable nature, I think, of these products. And so again, it may not be that the HHC or whatever version is that bad. It might even be less potent than THC, but there might be something else in there that they put for product differentiation that is from sloppy or unscrupulous activities. And again, all we can really say is these products were there. They were exposed to them. They are a factor in these case reports, and we don't know entirely if they are the cause. All right.
And
Exactly right. It's suspect, right? There, I mean, there could be a list, a laundry list of suspect products, but the authors felt compelled enough, and I think that that's what's important with all of these, right? Is it takes a lot of effort to put a case report together and get it published to make sure that the healthcare community, you know, is knowledgeable and understands this. Maybe it's not directly related and it's not the cause, but it is something, to Phil's point earlier, like, you know, we have to make our patients, you know, our family, friends, the community aware of that they're not sure exactly what it is that they may be taking, that it's not regulated, right? Just like, I mean, there's a lot of things when you go to the health food store that aren't regulated, and we're just highlighting that. Oh, we have some that are going, but yep, it's been a great night. We'll tell you when we're going to do it. I think it's going to be Tuesdays, might be a little earlier though.
All right. Yep. Keep
All right.
wherever you found out about this journal club, we'll put the update there on LinkedIn or at your society's homepage or webpage. We're running out of cannabinoid time, so.
And thanks, everyone. It was a great conversation this evening. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good night. Mention
Thank-
this to your colleagues.
Yeah, right. Spread the word.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this, guys. You're my people.
Thank you.